Good morning all, and welcome to the State of the Service Roadshow event for New South Wales. My name is Angela McKinnon and I will be your MC and facilitator today. And thank you everyone for joining us online. There's a great turnout from New South Wales. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on whose country I present from today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I would also like to extend that acknowledgement to the traditional custodians on whose country that you are participating from today. Now to start, we'll be using Slido for some public service trivia, which I think should be a bit of fun. And then the keynote address will be delivered by Australian Public Service Commissioner Peter Woolcott, followed by a short panel discussion, and then your questions will be answered by the panel. Now, all questions can be submitted via the Q&A function on Slido. So there is a Q&A code on the screen right now that will take you to Slido. Simply take out your mobile and scan the code. And you can also enter the number on the screen at Slido's website to join from your browser. Now, for those who are on the site now, you should see the first question. There are 20 seconds, just 20 seconds on the clock for everyone to answer the question, and before we show the correct answer. So the first is, what is the most popular male name for the Australian Public Service in New South Wales? The answer is Michelle. So Michael and Michelle. So what is the average age of the APS employee in New South Wales? Be interesting. The average age is 45. So what are the top 3 countries where New South Wales APS employees were born outside of Australia? I think I can take a guess on 1 or 2, but I'll let you answer the questions. Is India, England, and the Philippines? So that's really interesting and does give us a little bit of a hint at what diversity we've got across our public service. So thank you to everyone who played along. I would now like to invite Peter Woolcott, the Australian Public Service Commissioner, to deliver the keynote address. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Angela. It's great to be here. And thank you to everyone online, including all the Michaels and Michelles who have joined this event today. It's wonderful to have you here and to be connected for this event. So welcome to the 2023 State of the Service Roadshow New South Wales edition. This event is our chance to come together as a community, listen to one another, and share our knowledge and experiences as public servants. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dean Knudson from the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, and Kirsten Fish from the Australian Taxation Office. Together, we will answer and discuss your questions and look to provide insight into the opportunities and challenges that face the Australian public service today and into the future. Now, APS reform. The APS's operating environment is complex. We have ongoing economic and social challenges from the after effects of COVID-19. Think about the geopolitical disruptions across the world, natural disasters, and what is an increasingly tight labour market for skills. To address these and build a better public service for the future, we want to make sure that the APS embodies integrity in everything that it does, puts people and business at the centre of policy and services, is a model employer, and has the capability to do its job well. We are not perfect, but we will continue to build trust, collaborate, learn, be a great place to work, and meet the challenges of an increasingly complex and interconnected world. I'll touch on 4 things today: the APS Academy, integrity, leadership, and workforce matters, including mobility, diversity, and flexibility. And then we'll take questions on any range of issues that you would like to ask us. So firstly, let's just turn to the APS Academy. One of the ways we can continue to grow and develop as a public service is through the APS Academy. We started the Academy in end of June 2021, and the Academy provides an integrated whole-of-service approach to learning and development for the Australian Public Service. To do this, the Academy is focused on equipping the APS with the necessary foundations to deliver great policy and services, and these are focused on the idea of APS crafts. All areas of APS craft are guided by the APS values and ultimately help to contribute to the success of an individual's continuous learning. We all have a responsibility to commit to learning and developing our skills, and I encourage you all to head to the APS Academy website and see the selection of courses on offer. You can also sign up to the My Academy newsletter to receive regular updates about courses and new training offerings. We'll put a link in the Teams chat for you. Now, integrity. Integrity is at the core of everything we do. The APS has a high standard of integrity and professionalism, and to safeguard this, we must continually strengthen our integrity culture. The Australian Public Service Commission delivers practical initiatives to build and support the integrity culture across the APS. This is part of the government's broad agenda of public sector integrity reform. The Commission has published an integrity metrics resource. This was designed to support agencies to understand their current integrity measurement capability and to help them make informed decisions on where to focus future effort. This helps to lift integrity measurement, monitoring, and reporting. On leadership behaviours, we're looking to build a culture of integrity where we need to lead by example. The new Secretary's Chart of Leadership Behaviours sets out the expectations we have for leaders. And we deliver a range of leadership and talent development programs through the APS Academy and APS Talent Councils to support emerging and current leaders. You can find out more about the leadership programs again on our website. On mobility, what we're seeing is that mobility across the APS is increasing. In 2021-2022, we saw a 5.4% increase in ongoing staff taking up mobility opportunities on a permanent basis. This is the highest annual rate in the last 2 decades. The mobility framework was released in 2021. 1/3 of respondents to the 2022 employee census reported a temporary move at some time in the last 3 years, with 1/5 of those going to a different agency. What mobility does is enhance the capability of employees and organisations. It helps you learn to speak other people's languages. Exposures to different roles in workplace increases employee skills and experience and helps them to build networks and understand the variety of roles available across the service. Again, if you're interested in finding out more about mobility opportunities for yourself or for a member of your team, please visit the APS Jobs website. Let me now turn to the skilled workforce. The APS Workforce Strategy 2025 is supporting a cultural shift in strategic workforce planning. To do this, the APSC Centre of Excellence in Workforce Planning is building the capability in planning across the service. The strategy is supported by the development of the APS professional streams, these being data, digital and the human resource professions, and the centralised management of career pathways and entry-level recruitment. The professional streams are designed to lift the data and digital expertise of the APS workforce, including in the SES, delivering user-centred entry pathways and career development opportunities so that the APS becomes more attractive to join and more attractive as a place to stay. 2 recent initiatives to strengthen attraction is the Affirmative Measures Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Recruitment Hub, launched in July 2022, and the Affirmative Measure Disability Employment Recruitment Hub, launched in November 2022. Let me now turn to the Future Work. And the Future Work Subcommittee of the Secretaries Board is helping us to better understand push and pull factors in attracting and retaining the critical skills and talents for the APS. We need to broaden the way we attract a talented and diverse workforce, how we encourage people to apply and work for us, and how we recruit into senior roles. We also need to invest more in our people and how we nurture them and their careers to stay in the service. To enhance our employee value proposition, we're exploring options around location and flexibility, and we're looking to reinvest in internal capability and reduce reliance on external expertise. The Commission is developing an APS-wide approach to flexibility. While agency heads will continue to be best placed to make decisions about the operational requirements of their agency in a competitive labour market, there is a compelling case to support greater flexibility across the service and embed flexible work in the APS employee value proposition. To ensure flexibility works for everyone, arrangements must suit agencies and teams as well as individuals. Now, in closing, in 2023, it's going to be a big year for the Australian Public Service, and things don't look to be slowing down anytime soon. I'd like to encourage you all to not only continue to work incredibly hard, that you're doing, but also take care of yourselves and one another. And thank you again for tuning in today, and I look forward to participating in the discussion and to answering your questions. Thanks again for tuning in.
Thank you, Peter. It was great for all of us to hear what progress is being made at the Commission, and I'm sure you'll be asked more about it today. Now, the State of the Roadshow is an annual occasion where we come together and talk through ideas for the public service. We can also share our stories and experiences. And the Australian Public Service Commission is now capturing some of those stories, which is great. And we'll now show a trailer of some of the stories captured so far.
My name is Leanne. I'm based in Canberra. I work at the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and this is my story.
Hello, my name is Ben.
My name is Sunam Safar.
My name's Hannah.
My name is Mohammed Al Abri.
I'm Grant Nicholson.
My name is Robin Edmonds.
My name's Andrew Pfeiffer.
Hey there, my name is Belle Hogg.
My name is Megan Kopatz, and this is my APS story. So I got to talk to different agencies, see inside their cultures and their initiatives and what they were doing, and I thought, wow, there's so much going on in the APS. I really need to broaden my horizons.
Starting out in service delivery, taking calls from Australians who were unemployed and hearing some stories that broke my heart, and that really started off a very rewarding time being able to help the Australian public, and that hasn't changed.
There's plenty of opportunity around now. They've got a thing called a development register, that if you're interested in developing your career and working your way up from maybe as a team leader.
I continue to learn and share all around government through the amazing communities that I've been involved with. There's a thing called the Digital Profession, and I'm running a visual scribing community. So we have local, state, federal, all kinds of different government agencies, departments that come together.
The advice that I would give to people is do experience time in other organisations. It's well worth it to expand your horizons and to go and spend time discovering what other agencies do and sharing your talent around. But at the same time, if you're comfortable in the organisation you're adding value there. There is value for the organisation in you staying for a period of time in the organisation.
Bring like-minded people together. We share webinars, we bring in speakers, and we hold events like clothes swaps. The next big event we're trying to hold is an APS-wide event for Clean Up Australia Day on the 5th of March 2023. We hope to see you there.
I started up their neurodiversity network, which grew to 400 members in 1 year. And I was super thrilled that the ATO supported me in co-founding their network.
And so we decided to bring people together for a bit of a meeting just to explore what it was that agencies were already doing, what they were maybe aware of, what they thought were opportunities and what they really wanted to learn. So we kind of wanted to have this exploratory meeting just to, I guess, gauge the level of interest and maturity, if you will, right, with neurodiversity awareness and inclusion across the APS.
So there was so much support because I was at the learning stage. People were there to support me, help me, gave me like the network and development opportunities, but within APS 6 is something I have to find on my own. But it's really amazing and challenging for me because this was something I was looking for, that where I can challenge myself, get out of the comfort zone, and maybe an inspiration for others.
My highlight was definitely the evaluation workshop I led, because it directly led to the agency changing its HR processes in a meaningful way, so I thought it was very impactful. My key takeaway from this whole experience working on the project is that each and every person has power to create change.
Isn't it fantastic that we have so many diverse and interesting stories to share? I'm sure that everyone here today can relate to them and that you have your own story to tell. So I encourage everybody to share their stories with their colleagues. We'll now move into the panel discussion. Just a reminder, if you have a question for the panel, please send it to Slido. If you see a question and also want to hear the answer, you can like the question to vote it up. The more votes, the more likely the question will be answered. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists, who were introduced a bit earlier by Peter. And please join me in the discussion, Dean Knudson, Deputy Secretary for the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, and Kirsten Fish, Second Commissioner, Law, Design and Practice from the Australian Taxation Office. So thank you all for joining me today. Now, I just have a few questions to start off before we turn to the audience. Now, in the Australian Public Service in New South Wales, the staff have said that work-life balance and job satisfaction are two of the most important qualities for their job. And I tend to agree. And how do you see this implemented in your workplace? And what advice can you give to those listening today? Dean, I'll hand it over to you, and then to Kirsten.
Thanks very much, Angela. So it's a really live debate, and I think the key thing that I would say is it's utterly a personal choice. And Peter talked about the strategy that the APS is trying to develop, which will be an APS-wide approach on flexible work arrangements. But that idea that it needs to work not only for the team, but also for the individual is really at the core of it. So what we're seeing in a few different ways is COVID fundamentally changed everything, right? So our understanding of how dispersed teams can work, when do they need to come together, when can they function separately, has really evolved at a rapid rate. I think what we're left with, though, is that we've still got a remarkably important value proposition, and Peter talked about that as well, to citizens who may want to be part of a public service. For me, it was very much a personal choice. It was a values connection that happened relatively early in my public service career. I thought I wanted to go back and work in the private sector and earn more money and go back to my hometown. But I found out that I loved the Canberra of Canada, as I call Ottawa, as part of my experience. But I think what it boils down to in terms of work-life balance is that that flexibility comes down to the individual circumstances. I think we all need to be thinking really clearly about what matters most to us. I know for myself, there's a few things that I absolutely embed. And one of those from COVID was I need to exercise every day. That's one of the things, that's one of the ways it manifests for me. And that might be a run at 7 o'clock at night, which is not exactly perfectly well balanced, but it's way better than not doing it. So figuring that out for yourself as an individual, then figuring out how does it interact with your team. One of the other things that I think we're all facing, this is a remarkably ambitious government. And I think a large part of the service, people I'm talking to, are really struggling in some ways with the scale of the ambition. They're enthused about it in many ways, but I think that also points to, and it might sound a bit less exciting, but working with your bosses all the way up to a minister and figuring out, well, what matters most and when do you need it? That basic craft of being a good public servant and managing a large agenda through is really important for maintaining work-life balance as well. But once you know what you need to focus on, you've got clear expectations, and then you figure out what matters to you. And I'm seeing lots of people doing that in very different ways. We've got, I know of a band 3 who works a 9-day fortnight. That's the way that she manages it. We've got other band 2s who are located in all parts of New South Wales, in particular, out on the south coast, etc. But that's all so much more easy than it used to be because of the lessons learned from COVID. So I think it's a reflection point for each of us as individuals, but then to engage with their teams and figure out what's going to make most sense. Thanks, Angela.
Thank you, Dean. Kirsten, would you like to add to that?
I would. Thank you. Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Dean. And thank you, Peter, for having me. Thank you to all of you for joining in. I love my job, so talking about job satisfaction is something that I really do enjoy. I love my job. I love working at the ATO, and I'm not alone. We always have consistently high job satisfaction scores. And I think one thing organisationally, it is essential for us to support job satisfaction. We've invested a huge amount in our culture, and I think that that plays a huge role in job satisfaction for the individuals within teams. Really, our people created our cultural traits. They're the things that they believe we should be doing that will bring them satisfaction in their role. And they include being client-focused, empowered and trusted, passionate and committed. And I think really investing in a culture that supports integrity and client service really embeds in our people the real drive to serve the community, and that brings a lot of purpose and satisfaction to them. But the leadership is also really important. One of the things we've recently done is relaunch our SES leadership strategy, and in that we've got 4 leadership attributes, and we've specifically called out that it's incumbent on our SES leaders to enrich the work experience for their people. It's our leaders' jobs, really, to make their staff and their people's lives at work fulfilled and enjoyable, to find ways to enable collaboration and cooperation, to make work interesting, and to embrace and model inclusive behaviour and diversity. So I think having all of those structural things within an organisation really enhances the experience of everyone who gets to come to work there and really makes that a lot more enjoyable. In terms of work-life balance, I completely agree with everything that Dean has talked about. Organisationally, again, you have to have the policies in place that support work-life balance. You have to have the culture that supports work-life balance. In the ATO, we've always had flexible working in terms of part-time arrangements, job sharing. Obviously, like everybody else, after COVID, we've moved to work from home arrangements. Our staff can work up to 2 days a week at home, and 87% of our staff take that option up by agreement with their manager. But it has to be by agreement with your manager, and managers have to be supported to enable all of their staff to really achieve a work-life balance, to be productive and engaged and connected in the workplace, but also have that balance with the rest of their lives in order to be a holistic person, to come to work as their best selves. So we are looking at really supporting managers, giving them the tools to be able to manage in this new kind of hybrid environment. But like Dean was talking about, I really think there's a lot of personal commitment that needs to be made in order to achieve work-life balance. Your organisation and your manager can support it as much as possible, but I really think it's incumbent on each of us to really take control of our own destiny, in a sense, to really think about and reflect on what do you value in life? What brings you joy and fulfillment, and look at what are you spending your time on, and have you got that time allocation right for you? It really is a personal thing. I also think that work-life balance is about being your best self at work as well. Really, how to make your time at work meaningful and productive, and by doing that manage the burnout and fatigue and stress that can come with work. So, really taking the opportunity to think about what are the most important things when I'm at work that will achieve my teams or groups or organisations' objectives, and focusing on those in particular. Really thinking about when you're away from work, what is it that you need to replenish yourself? What brings you energy so you can show up and give everything you've got during the workday and leave and enjoy your time outside of work as well. And I think circling back to job satisfaction, really finding a role, and within a role, finding the things in that role that bring you joy. Finding a job that when you're at work, it fulfills you and energizes you, and finding those tasks. Not everything in every job is enjoyable. There's lots of bits. Even though I love my job, there are bits of it that I like less. Everyone does, but finding the bits that bring you joy and focusing on those is a really important part of your work-life balance.
Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, those things definitely resonate with me, and I'm sure they resonate with a lot of people in the audience. So my second question is, now the APS has a merit list portal for HR teams to access, which is a great resource. How do you see this being used to ease recruiting into the APS? I'll let Kirsten go first.
Oh, thanks, Angela. So I think the portal is a great initiative. It certainly should make it easier to identify available merit lists, to be able to really reduce the time and money and effort in recruitment exercises, reduce the time it takes to get access to good people and to onboard them. And it really is there to support mobility and cross-skilling, which is one of the essential things I think we need for the future of the public service. I think there are a number of people, process, cultural challenges that we will have to face. The portal itself is a great technological structural solution, but to make it really valuable, there's a few things I think that we need to do to make sure we come together. So having some consistency and clarity between agencies as to their processes. I think we have to build trust in each other that the merit lists are robust and the calibre of the people on there are comparable. And I think, working through the length of time and the perceptions that merit lists might be stale, or just getting over those kind of cultural issues about the need to control particular processes in order to have faith in their outcome. But I think there is a cross-agency group of people come together to work through all of these challenges, and I think really working together we can get a lot of efficiencies and a lot of aggregate benefit out of the portal and the way that we use the merit lists on it.
Thanks, Kirsten. Dean, did you like to add anything?
I just wouldn't mind saying that absolutely anything that makes it easier, faster to do recruitment is pretty important. We've actually stood up a small team that is driving the recruitment effort within our organization, because we have to grow at a pretty incredible rate over the next little while. But the reality is that the retention side of things is a really important thing to keep in mind. And that goes back to the first question a bit, Angela, in terms of what's the value proposition that an organization is offering.
Yeah.
And just as a cautionary note, so I spent a little over a year and a half in New South Wales, working with the New South Wales government just recently, just coming back in September. And we got a pretty large uptake in budget, and that was in May. By the time I left at the end of September, we'd gone backwards in terms of our overall staffing numbers in Sydney, right? So really big, robust market. And it goes to Peter's comment about the labor market being really tight and not losing track of that. So I think we have to get a bit more sophisticated and think about the range of what is the value proposition that we're talking to people about. A couple of examples that I think are really going to be important going forward in a labor market. We just talked about flexibility. It's also, we're looking at opening offices in a number of the capital cities so that we can have effectively state-based staff who are absolutely essential to the relationships that we need in a federation working with states and territories like New South Wales. It's a really critical piece that means you don't have to move to Canberra permanently. You might come here for a few days a week, et cetera, or whatever, right? But the point is being much more tuned to what the labor market is looking for versus being, almost a monopolistic hire of public servants where we have full control over it, which we never have never been able to do. But it's increasingly drifting away from that, and we're into an incredibly competitive market, not only for recruitment, but also, quite frankly, for retention and really keeping that top of mind.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a great resource, and definitely for a scheme like ours, I think we made it able to access it and get more specialist skills into the region that we need. So I think that it also serves that purpose as well, particularly where you might need surge capacity. So thank you for that. I think I might turn to the audience now because we've got some questions coming in. Just apologies, I just have to turn to the left a bit to read the questions. But so the first question is, we know remote working works, removes discrimination, energises regions, opens recruitment for the First Nations people in the country. Why enforce office attendance? So I might hand that one to Dean.
Sure. So this is such a really live issue. And in some workforces, so we've got a large national parks presence, which actually has a really significant First Nations representation in our staffing. And obviously for that type of work, their office is a national park. For the most part. And so it's not a traditional sense of, you need to come to an office in Canberra. And quite frankly, most of the operational requirements of that type of organization don't require it. But we are very explicitly looking at how do you design employee-employer relationships around the individual, where for many First Nations people, going back to country, back to family on a regular basis and for extended periods of time is absolutely critical. So we've got to figure out a way, as Peter was saying, that works for the team, but also for the individual. And part of this is a cultural bit that Kirsten was talking about is, I think as a public service, we've still got a long way to go. And there's probably not going to be a more important year for us to be thinking about this centrally on First Nations issues and our relationship with and for and beside First Nations people. Both as employees and organizations, but also more broadly. And how do we improve our cultural competency across the board? The question almost goes to that issue, quite frankly, that there is a disconnect in cultures that we really need to confront and have very open discussions about. But I don't think it's a cookie cutter answer. I think it's going to be, in a large way, you can set the organizational settings correct in terms of we're open, we want to have the conversation, but then it really does need to happen in a material way.
Thanks, Dean. The second question is, most mobility opportunities require to be in Canberra. Is there consideration being given to increase virtual opportunities for staff not in Canberra? Now, maybe I might ask Peter about that question.
Thanks, Angela. And I might also pick up the location question that Dean answered as well, because they're blended in a way. if you look at the data, over 60% of the public service is actually outside of Canberra anyway. But what is in Canberra is very much the leadership component, and that's because it's the capital. That's because where the government is based and the political class are based. And so there's always going to have to be a heavy leadership component in Canberra because the government will expect that. But how can you manage that? And increasingly, we're looking at people being based out of Canberra, but they're coming back into Canberra for when Parliament's sitting or for key meetings. So Canberra's always going to be the centre. But location is a really interesting issue because what we're finding in terms of recruiting talent is we need to go to meet them where they are. So if they're working in Adelaide as a data analyst or in Melbourne, they're not going to come to Canberra. They can get jobs in Adelaide or Melbourne. So we need to become much more flexible around location and where it actually works for both the agency and the individual. So it is something that we're increasingly interested in sourcing our talent from different locations. And one example is we've just set up, we're setting up 4 academic campuses around digital and data entry-level talent, where we're looking at 4 regional universities as the basis for that talent. They'll attend those universities whilst being employed full-time by the public service as well. So that's just one way which reflects our thinking around location. But I just want to add in terms of what are the benefits of working in the office. And you shouldn't forget that how do you teach culture? How do you basically develop your culture without people attending in an office? How do people learn? Increasingly, it's not just learning from a formal classroom environment. We're in a process of continuous learning in terms of the public service, but you learn a lot from watching your peers, from watching your colleagues, and from actually being in an office environment and networking as well. So there are actual real benefits from being present in an office. And so I think the day of the office is not dead, but what is very much alive and well is increasing flexibility around how you do that. But the office remains important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now for Kirsten, there's a question. Has the APS considered setting up cross-agency offices in regional areas so that public servants from all small agencies can work in the office with APS colleagues?
Thanks, Angela. And actually, maybe Peter might want to comment on this one as well. I would say I can't speak for the whole of the APS, certainly from the ATO's perspective, we have got offices where other government agencies are co-located in the same building. In terms of access to buildings, of course, security, particularly for the ATO, is a huge issue and one that we take very, very seriously. But in our regional, some of our regional areas, we are co-located with some other government departments, and of course when leases come up we do look at that as well, particularly in regional areas. Really the opportunities for mobility across the public service are found in the city centres primarily, but we find a lot of we have offices in Albury and Townsville and Gosford and in quite a lot of regional areas too. And so considering how not just cross-skilling and opportunities to move across the APS are there, but also with the public service in the States is also important. So, particularly in areas like we've got our Gosford office, we can look at opportunities for cross-skilling and recruitment across between the public service and the New South Wales Public Service.
Thanks,
Kirsten.
After you, Dean.
Point on this, which is, I really do think the point that Kirsten talked about also looking at co-location with states and territories, really interesting, right? A lot of our work is often dependent on the relationships with the states and territories. We've had outposted officers, for example, on environmental approvals embedded with the New South Wales planning area for quite some time. the extent of the relationships, the understanding of the issues, the interactions are just brilliant, and they wouldn't happen if we weren't co-located. And we're only talking a handful of staff, but it can make a marvelous difference for how we do our business. And that repeats itself over and over again. And to Peter's point, I guess I would say the office isn't dead, not in Canberra, but quite frankly, across the country. It is about trying to figure out, where does it really make sense to come together? How do you, the other point that I think has come through is making sure there's a purpose for when you do come together. And then it's so different than what you can do like this online. You can only get so much insight from an online session versus the day-to-day conversations. And I loved working from home, but my God, I was surprised how much I needed to come back. And
so, Peter, I think you had something you'd like to say too.
Yeah, no, just agree very much with what Kirsten and Dean were saying. Co-location is something we need to actually do better on. And the point that Dean was making also around thinking about co-location with states and territories and other jurisdictions is a really important component to that. So I think that, as I say, there's a lot more work we need to do around here. We've been caught up with technological systems that don't work together very well, with security clearance type issues. We need to work through all that because I actually think there are real benefits culturally to co-location as well.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So the next question's for you too, Peter. So how do we normalise pay rates across the APS when salaries in some agencies are so high?
Yes, good question. Over time is what I would suspect. Obviously, the Albanese government has come in with a very different workforce relations agenda. They have made it very clear that they want return to fair and equitable bargaining, and we are looking now to negotiate common pay and conditions across the Australian public service. So that is a process that is now underway, or about to get underway. You should all be about to receive your what's called NERR, your Notice of Employee Representational Rights, and essentially following that, bargaining formally kicks off. But we've been doing a lot of consultation with agencies about what common terms and conditions might look like. And we sent out a survey, which was, I must say, a spectacular response from the APS. Something like 50,000 public servants responded in terms of what was important to them. And there were three aspects to that. One was wages. The second one was flexibility of work. And the third one was around common sort of leave arrangements. So obviously we are sort of digesting that and in detailed discussions with agency COOs about what common terms and conditions might look like. We'll then go into bargaining with the 20 trade unions that represent the Australian Public Service workforce. And we are looking to kick that off in March, and we're looking to complete that by the middle of the year, very ambitious timeframe, before handing it over to, essentially at the same time, agencies will be looking to bargain their particular sort of specific conditions, whether that might be rosters and those sorts of things. Part of the Albanese government's approach to bargaining is also to look at how you might bring things back together in terms of pay and conditions, which are very different across agencies. But that's going to take time, and obviously that can get expensive. So that's that is something that they're determined to do, but as I say, over a period of time. And we're obviously looking at where we should start and how we do that. But that rebalancing, I think, is very important, both in terms of being fair and equitable across the system, but also greatly enhancing mobility as well. So it's a start of a journey we're on. It's a complicated journey, but it's a very important journey.
Thank you, Peter. That was very comprehensive. Now, I think the next question is very pertinent to New South Wales and regions. And so I think everyone can probably comment on this one. What initiatives are there to retain regional staff in regional areas? Because actually not everyone can move to the city to get their career progressed. So, Dean, would you like to start that conversation? I think probably everyone can comment on that.
Sure. So when I was within the New South Wales government, we had a series of 6 regional offices, and because the state government has so much on the ground across the state, there was actually pretty good progression opportunities, at least up to a band 1 equivalent in the state, and you could still say in a regional hub. It was still a hub model. It wasn't literally, Deniliquin or something like that. It was Albury, Wodonga kind of hubs. But that model of rolling out delivery on the ground works perfectly in a state system. The Commonwealth is further removed, so it's harder, quite frankly. But I think the concept, and Peter picked it up, about are there smaller offices that could be co-located with state area offices, so that at least there's a community of practice, and you're with your other public servant colleagues, even if they're from a different department or government, is still better than having nothing at all. But I guess I'm trying to infuse a bit of realism from my perspective anyways. We can go a certain distance towards regional opportunities, but the reality is that's not our principal aim. Yes, the outcomes of our work impact dramatically on regional and remote areas, quite frankly, but it's more central to the states and territories. That being said, we've talked about the concept of flexibility, and again, I guess my point of realism would be picking up on Peter's point that the center of the leadership of government will remain in Canberra. So it is a bit of a two-street. We do have, I can think of a couple band 2s that work remotely, and they come into Canberra when it makes most sense, etc. So it's possible, and you can have a very meaningful career, etc., doing that. But it is a harder path. And yes, we can make it easier, but I don't want to create the expectation. I think it would just be misleading to say, oh, it'll be perfect. You can be in Wagga Wagga. Well, actually, Wagga is actually a good example of probably a regional hub that could happen, but smaller communities, I used Deniliquin earlier on, where it just isn't going to make sense. And I think those are the choices that all of us have to make in life. I mean, I've moved from Canada out here for a reason. I've worked in the New South Wales government for a reason. Those came at significant personal cost, but I think it was important for my own personal satisfaction, career satisfaction, and development to do those moves. And so I think that's the last piece of realism is part of this is that you have to weigh up what matters to you most, but in life there's always consequences, and mitigate them, but we can't eliminate them. So it's a really tough question that was asked, but I think we can make it better, but not perfect.
So I think I completely agree with what Dean said, and I think it does come down to mutual give and take between staff and their managers. We have some regional offices in New South Wales, particularly in Albury and Gosford. As I said, we also have an office in Newcastle, and quite deliberately so in those locations, particularly Newcastle and Gosford. What's really important is that those regional offices are connected with the local community and build on the local community there as well. Particularly for our office in Newcastle and Gosford, really having that connection with the university so that people can see a pathway out of university through the tax office and can see growth opportunities and opportunities for them to challenge themselves and have long-standing careers there. I think it's also really important to be very deliberate about the activities that you conduct in those offices as well, and having pathways for staff and all of our people to find that next challenge, or to be really satisfied with the role that they're performing, and know that they're making a significant and valuable contribution to the achievement of the ATO's goals, but also contributing to the public service. So we have to be very deliberate about what functions and what activities we put together within offices, not only to kind of attract talent into those offices, but also to provide pathways for people to grow and challenge and make different contributions within that regional area. But as Dean said, I think that then it does come a bit of give and take between individuals and their managers and the organisation. We want to attract different skills. For example, we want to attract, particularly data scientists and cybersecurity people, and we have to think broader about how we attract those and where we bring them in, but bringing them into a culture that's very supportive and inclusive, and how you manage inclusion in that kind of environment. You do have to have a bit of give and take. People do have to kind of come in and be a part of a team, contributing to the larger whole, working across different parts of the organisation collaboratively with their colleagues to achieve outcomes. So, having regional offices is great, but you are still going to get people that need to travel. And travel to, in New South Wales' case, travel to Sydney. We've got the Commissioner, myself, another second Commissioner, and a Band 3 all based in Sydney. We travel around the country a lot, but that pathway is not necessarily all to Canberra. As you get more senior in the organisation, make different contributions, but necessarily comes with that give and take, I think, in and balance between working outside of the office, working in the office, and working with your peers and others across the organisation.
Well, thanks, Kirsten. So the next one's for Peter as well. How do you overcome the reputational damage on public servants in general coming out of the robo-debt RC?
Yeah, obviously a very topical question. There's some Robo-Debt Royal Commission has thrown up some serious issues that we're looking at. Obviously, the Royal Commission is ongoing at the moment. We've not seen their interim report or their final report, which is due at the end of June. But there are issues that have been thrown up around what you might call sort of behavioural issues. There are issues that have been thrown up around record keeping and about the treatment of draft legal advice. There are issues that have been thrown up around what you might call courage in providing advice. And these are all things that we will need to think about. We've set up an integrity task force with ourselves, Prime Minister and Cabinet and Attorney General's Department to start working through some of these issues in terms of what do we need about further guidance particularly around, say, record keeping and note taking and legal advice. And the issue of leadership behaviours is something that we have been working on for a while. The Charter of Leadership Behaviours, which was produced by Secretary's Board last year, is a really important piece of work because it's very much around adaptive and systems leadership, and it's very much about not only focusing on outcomes, which is fundamental to government and citizens, but it's also about how you get those outcomes. So behaviours are increasingly important, and there's work being done now around the performance assessment system for SES in terms of how do you give proper weight to behaviours as well as outcomes. So yes, we'll have to wait for the final report of the Royal Commission, but it has thrown up a range of issues which we're looking at very seriously.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Peter. So the next one's a really pertinent question.
Angela.
Well. Sorry, Dean, you go ahead.
Just one thing to think about, and folks in New South Wales would be alive to this, obviously, the importance of ICAC and the cultural impact that continues to have on the New South Wales Public Service. I saw it both, but also chief of staff from my former minister was from the New South Wales government, and he embedded that. There were just really clear behaviors and practices as a result of having that. We're about to have a similar structure here in the Commonwealth. And so I think when you combine the Integrity Commission combined with the insights that will undoubtedly come through this inquiry, there's a lot of significant issues that we'll have to grapple with. But I think that's a good thing. And I'm finding it confronting. There are different parts of this that if I reflect on, I don't think I've been the model that I would want to be. And so I think all of us, if we're reflecting on this, will have insights. And I reiterate the need to think about very profoundly as an individual public servant about what is coming through these various pieces of reform, and then you combine the public service reform as well, which is also going to be another source of change. But all of it, I think, is heading in a very positive direction, as uncomfortable as it'll be. I just wanted to.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Yeah, so the next question I think we can also open to the panel, to all the panel. In order to improve work-life balance, do you think it's worth considering trying to standardise a 4-day week? I understand that this happens in other places, and so whether we could standardise a 4-day week, and what would that entail?
Kick off on that, Angela, if I may. Yeah. When we look at flexibility, and this came out very clearly in COVID as well, where I think at the maximum peak of people working from home, it was about 56%. But that was driven by health advice, state and territory regulations around working from home as well. But what we didn't look to direct agencies to do anything in a certain way, because they know their business. If you think about the diversity of work we do in the public service, you might have the Productivity Commission and the Future Fund at one end, and then you've got Border Force and Centrelink at the other end in terms of having to engage with people face to face. It's an enormous diversity of work, and you've got to let agency heads, they know their business, you've got to let agency heads do their business and manage it. So we are looking currently at basically setting out general overarching principles around flexible work, which won't go to you should spend so many days in the office or so many days at home or whatever. The principles will be based around, one, obviously employees are very interested in flexible work, and we have to be competitive in the marketplace. And we've always, as a public service, been very good around flexibility, and we need to continue that as part of our employee value proposition. But that said, it's also fundamental that we actually deliver for people in government in terms of what we do. And it's very important we look at this from the perspective of mutual benefit, and also you're part of a team and how it works for your team. And so it has to flow two ways. It has to be good for the individual, but it has to also work for your team and your agency. And I talked earlier about some of the cultural aspects or the benefits of working in an office environment at times. So that's again a part of the equation. So we're working through these broad principles at the moment. We'll leave it to agency heads, we'll leave it to Dean and Kirsten to manage it in their operations. But there are, as I say, really strong arguments around mutual benefit that I think need to be factored in here.
Mm-hmm. So Dean or Kirsten, do you have any comment on that, or?
I just would make one quick one, which would be, there was a concept a few years ago about if not, why not? It's a concept that basically, again, it comes back to the individual saying, this is what I think would make the biggest difference in terms of me managing and getting that work-life balance, et cetera. And thinking about like making that the default to try to accept it. But Peter's point is dead on the money, and we've talked about it a few times about it is a mutual agreement, so it has to work for the team as well. But I really do think the living with a bit of discomfort for a period of time and trying some things out and figuring out how it works and perhaps readjusting, and so building in a little bit of we'll take stock in a month's time and see how that's going, or something like that that gives a reflection point. I think we need to really be going into it with an open mind. That's why I mentioned the if not, why not. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Dean.
That was pretty much the point I was going to make as well. So Dean got in first. But I do think it is, there's not a one size fits all. There are a lot of considerations to take into account by agency heads, but by managers as well. Whether we do have to have arrangements that work for the individual and work for the team. It can be very role dependent, but Dean's point about if not, why not? We have to be very conscious in how we design roles and think about what's really needed for those roles in order to deliver the outcomes that we're seeking. And then we also need to, this question came up in the context of work-life balance. I think premised on an assumption that if you work longer days, 4 days a week, and have 3 days not at work, that is a better work-life balance. But for some people that might not be. Working long days can be exhausting, and it is not necessarily the case for any particular individual that work arrangement is going to produce a better work-life balance given their other family or personal or health commitments. So there's a lot of factors, I think, to take into account.
Yeah, there are indeed. So our next question is, not all managers are made equal. How should the APSC and workplace ensure that staff under one manager get the same options as those under another? I might hand that one to Kirsten.
Thanks, Angela. So I think that is a really good question. And I think, it's incumbent on the organisation to provide support for managers. A manager's job is to turn up and do the best for their people, to put the people in the position where their people can succeed, to ensure that their people can deliver the outcomes and thrive in the workplace. But the skills to do that aren't necessarily all inherent. And so organisationally, I think we really need to give a lot of support to managers to ensure that they are developed within their roles, that they're given the best opportunity to succeed as managers as well. And there are formal ways and informal ways of doing that, but having, managers of managers be really attentive to their people, know what they need in order to develop and what they need in order to be the best that they can be managing their own people, and really tailoring, formal learning and development and coaching and mentoring and all of those things to give those managers support so that everyone in the workplace can thrive.
Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah. So we have some amazingly skilled individuals across the APS. And so the next question is really asking what initiatives are there for networking and to share ideas and collaborate across departments. So Dean, you might share some of your experience with your department and
well, it's a great. Yeah, it's a great question, and I've got to say I'm not sure that we have as many systemic approaches to how to do that. It's more by issue. So a really good example would be the inclusion and diversity networks, which obviously come together from departments and share learnings and insights across. And I think about some of the work that's happened on the disability networks coming together that has absolutely driven, because we had a few organizations that absolutely leaned in and just laid the roadmap out for the rest of us to be able to follow behind. So that's a really successful example. And beyond those, the criticality of those inclusion networks, we've also been doing that in a way that, again, is a bit more transactional, I would say. So we've often had to join up different agencies on different issues. That isn't going to the essence of the question that the person, the staff members put forward. So I quite frankly feel a little bit underdone on trying to answer this question, because I don't think we do enough of those. And I suspect Peter's got more insights as to what happens more system-wide. But I think the question, if nothing else, points out that we need to think a bit more about how do we foster, especially at the non-transactional, non-inclusion network levels, how do we make sure those opportunities come together?
Okay. Thank you, Dean.
Let me pop in if I can help follow up on Dean's comments. When I talk to young graduates who are just joining and they ask questions about what should they focus on, one of the pieces of advice I give them is network. Get to know people, because you'll grow up in the system with them. It's great to have contacts across the system in terms of furthering both your work, but your understanding of how the whole system actually works. And they'll provide advice to you. There'll be a resource for you as you move upwards. And so networking is really important. Dean's right. There's a lot more work we can do around this. Obviously, there are the things he's talked about, the disability network, the Indigenous SES network. There's quite a lot of these networks that are there. There's the formation of task forces. So indeed, I would recommend people to look for opportunities around task forces to work on issues that they are interested in. And then, of course, we've set up the professions model. So we've set up both the digital profession, the data profession, and the strategic human resources profession. And all of that is designed to develop really sort of professional networks where you can understand pathways, you share a common language, you can work together on issues. And they are, I think, an enormously important part of the way forward. And again, in terms of other professions, there's some consideration being given to looking at what they might be as well. So I couldn't agree more about the importance of networks.
If I can just add one thing to that as well, is that I don't think we should forget about opportunities to build networks outside of the public service as well, with the private sector and within the industries within which our jobs fall. We are all here to serve the public, to serve the community, to make it as easy as possible for clients and businesses to, in the tax officer's case, to comply, but it's really to provide excellent service to clients and businesses. And so connections across the public service are essential, but really having networks and connections and understanding what's going on in the community and within particular industries is also really, really important and will greatly assist your personal development, but also service delivery.
Yeah, I agree very much with Kirsten's point.
And our Australian government leadership networks have also promoted that connection, which is really good, I think. So the next question is for Peter again. Peter, a great deal of resourcing centres around discrimination, yet ageism is a real issue and growing. Are you looking to address this?
Yeah, look, interesting question. And if you think about the trivia question you got earlier about the average age of the New South Wales public service being 45, that's actually 45 is the line for mature workers. We did the same trivia question for Canberra for sort of the whole APS wide. It'd be 43. So we are an ageing public service. Obviously, we need to keep refreshing and getting new blood in, but at the same time, we need to be thinking about how we retain and develop our more mature staff. I've always seen the public service a bit like an apprenticeship, where you join and you continually learn things all the way up. And so by the time you're sort of elderly like me, or mature like me, you've hopefully got a lot of wisdom. You've seen a lot of things, and you bring that judgment of wisdom to issues. So we are looking at at the whole question of a maturing workforce and what it means for us as a public service. And again, flexibility is going to be critically important around that. How do you get people to stay in the system? Because what they bring to it is still very valuable. And again, flexibility is a big part of that. Often you have caring responsibilities. Your caring responsibilities for young children are over, but you may have caring responsibilities for grandchildren. You certainly probably got caring responsibility for ageing parents. And so again, it's a question of that flexibility of work, but also understanding what they bring. Because it's clear what young people bring when they join. They bring fresh ideas, they challenge the system, they're digitally savvy, they're data savvy. But actually mature workers also bring a huge amount to the system. And so how do we get that balance right? And it's around flexibility.
Yeah. Most definitely.
Sorry, Angela. I think there needs to be different approaches to bring those skills into the tax office or the public service more generally. You know, the standard processes of that we have for larger scale recruitment possibly aren't going to attract those people to them. But identifying that that cohort has a lot to contribute and different skills that they want to contribute perhaps in a different way, and figuring out organisationally actually how can we bring those skills in and put them to best use is just different pathways to allow that cohort to grow. That is something that we are very conscious of in the tax office. You know, we report on our mature age staffing in the same way as our other groups like Indigenous and LGBTQI plus workforces, because we are really conscious of it, and we do have a different program through which we can encourage those skills to come into the office. Dean made the point earlier also about retention and retaining them in the office, and ensuring that people are valued for the unique contribution they bring is really important to retaining them as well.
Yeah.
Can I add just a couple of points? I think I'm back on. I was having my own age challenge issues with the thing dropping out and me trying to figure out how to restart it. But anyway, I think it worked. Couple things. One is that the demographics of the country are headed this way. You're also seeing an increasing propensity to want to stay in the workforce. As someone who joined the public service in 2011, is on the new pension scheme, I'm much more sensitive than some of my other colleagues to how much. what does my retirement look like? Even as a deputy, it's a pretty daunting experience, and that's not your average person's experience, right? So I think you're going to see, as the PESSAP becomes more dominant over time, a lot of people thinking, I just want to keep on going a little bit. But the other piece of it is they're not looking to stay working 5 days a week, back to that earlier question. So again, I think it'll come down to some really pragmatic discussions with individuals about how can they play a meaningful role that isn't necessarily like everyone else's. And we've only done very limited work on that. But I think in 10 years' time, we're going to have to be in a much more sophisticated space on this, because the demographics are going to lead us that way.
Yeah, definitely points to the question of flexibility, flexible work arrangements, that's for sure. Yeah, so we have our last question now, and its point goes to Kirsten. During World Pride, we consider LGBTIQA and diversity. What are your departments doing in regards to LGBTIQA? and inclusion.
Well, I think that last point is the key. So we have a diversity and inclusion strategy that we refreshed and launched last year. We are very focused not just on the LGBTQI plus community, but also Indigenous employment, as well as disability employment, neurodiversity. There's a whole range of different groups that we cover in that diversity and inclusion strategy. We have 30 diversity champions, the SES champions across a range of those areas. We've got particular disability support officers and the disability inclusion officers that help support those of our officers that are with us that have disabilities and help us create a workplace that is inclusive of all abilities. So we are very much focused on diversity, but inclusion is particularly important, and supporting managers to focus on inclusion and different ways to be inclusive, particularly in a hybrid work environment, is a significant focus, and how we ensure that everyone feels safe and to be able to be their whole self at work is a really important part of creating that diverse and inclusive workplace.
And we have similar initiatives at the Department of Health. So before I wrap up, is there any other comments that our panel would like to make?
Can I just come on the back of that one as well? So I am the LGBTQI plus champion for the department, and it was a personal choice, right? Like, I've been out now for about 30 odd years, and, you know, March, when there were more protesters in Ottawa than there were participants in the parade, you know, went through HIV, all that sort of stuff. That is quite confronting. The thing that I've learned, and it's fantastic to be 53 and still learning such fundamental things, the network has way more representation of transgender people. It has way more representation of pansexuality, terms that I nominally understood, but not fundamentally, even as a gay man. But one of the great things that's happened is those folks are finding their voices on the back of the plebiscite, et cetera. And it's adding nuance and complexity in a really important way. Just like the conversation on disabilities in the department led to a carers network. They were saying, hold on, there's a whole other piece to people living with disability, which is those that care for. And I think that's going to continue to evolve. I guess all I would say is the most important thing is for people to join these networks, to advocate on what would make the biggest difference for them, and for managers and leaders to keep an open mind. But there is such, it just continues to evolve. I think it's all long over, et cetera. And no, it isn't. It's a really ongoing point of focus for all of us to create the type of workplace that we want to live in or work in, sorry.
Thanks. And that brings our panel discussion to a close. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers, Peter, Dean and Kirsten. Thank you for all your insights and sharing your wisdom and leadership with us today. It's really important that we're able to share that with you. I would also like to thank all of you for watching and contributing to the State of the Service Roadshow, the New South Wales event. Before we sign out today, though, we've spoken a lot about today networks. So I'd like to just share a quick note on the Australian Government Leadership Network, of which I'm chair of the New South Wales group. This leadership network sees APS staff and AP6 level and above come together regularly, both in person and virtually. And I must say, having the technology that we have has been able to bring a lot of people together across New South Wales and to discuss ideas and to connect. And it's really a great way, I think, for learning what's happening in other departments. You know, amazes me, we talked about the diversity across our public service, and we always hear, and I do meet a lot of people that have got a play really important roles and are making a big difference in the public service. And so I think it also broadens your professional network. And as I said, I have definitely been my experience, having been in the network now for several years. So if you're interested in hearing more about the Australian Government Leadership Network for New South Wales, just jump onto the APSC website, and the URL is in the chat function now. And I urge you to keep an eye out for the follow-up email to this session as well, because it will have information about how you can share your story. And we all want to hear it, that's for sure, about working in the Australian public service. So like the stories we saw earlier today in the APS Stories video, you can share your story. It will also have a link to recording of today's session. So if you want to listen to it again, I know that I certainly will. There was a lot discussed today and a lot to take in. And the State of the Service Roadshow is continuing this week, and events will be held in Tasmania and Western Australia for our colleagues. And so thank you, and I hope you all have a great week, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye, Peter.